You've probably heard of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I mean, it's one of the most famous, most analyzed poems of the entire 20th century. But what if I told you that for the last 100 years, we've been missing a huge piece of its story? Let's uncover a hidden trauma lurking between its iconic lines.
Right from the get-go, the poem just hits you with this unforgettable atmosphere. It's all about anxiety, fragmentation, and decay. It's a feeling that, well, many of us now know all too well. For a century, we've chalked this feeling up to one major catastrophe.
For pretty much as long as it's been studied, The Wasteland has been read as the great artistic response to the trauma of World War I. You know, a poem born from the trenches and the total collapse of an old world order. And look, this traditional view is incredibly settled. For decades, critics have connected the poem's brokenness to the war, to cultural decay, to Eliot's famously terrible marriage, and to a deep spiritual crisis. And those readings are powerful, for sure. They've really defined our understanding of the poem.
But this is where we run into a huge historical puzzle. The 1918 influenza pandemic, the Spanish flu, it killed up to 50 million people worldwide. That is far more than the war. It was a global cataclysm. And yet, it seems to be completely missing from the great poem of its time. So why?
Well, the answer seems to lie in how we remember and, maybe more importantly, how we forget tragedy. Why does one global trauma become the stuff of legend and memorials, while another, one that's just as deadly, just kind of fades away?
When you put them side by side, the contrast is really stark. War, we frame it as a collective sacrifice. It's got these clear stories of heroism. We build big national memorials to honor what we see as a worthy death. A pandemic, though? That's a deeply individual battle. It's a story of helplessness, not heroism. And death from disease was often seen as private, even disgraceful, which led to it basically being erased from the culture.
The scholar Elizabeth Outka puts it perfectly. She says you can't build a monument to a virus. The battle is internal, it's invisible, and it's isolating. It just doesn't fit into our big, grand historical stories. It's simply tragedy, and that's much harder for a culture to process and memorialize.
Okay, so the culture at large might have forgotten the flu. But did T.S. Eliot himself forget? To find out, we have to shift from cultural history to personal biography. And specifically, we need to look at the letters he was writing while he was actually composing the poem.
And what we find in there is, frankly, staggering. The virus wasn't some distant news story for Eliot. Not at all. He and his wife both caught it in December 1918. So for the next few years, as he's writing The Wasteland, influenza was this constant, draining, unavoidable part of his daily life.
And in his letters, he does something really fascinating. He uses the word influenza to describe two things at the same time: the actual virus that was making them sick and the toxic, feverish atmosphere of his failing marriage. For Eliot, the virus and his personal suffering became one and the same thing.
He also writes about the raw physical reality of the illness. He describes these really specific, recognizable symptoms: extreme dryness, a bitter taste, dehydration. Now, remember that detail. Keep it in your back pocket because it is going to become very, very important.
So there we have it. We have the biographical link. Eliot was living in a viral world, both physically and emotionally. Now, let's use that context as a new kind of key and see if we can unlock the poem's famously difficult language. First, to really get this, we need a new tool. Elizabeth Outka calls it delirium logic. Just think about the last time you had a really high fever. Your thoughts were probably all over the place, right? Jumping between memories and anxieties and just bizarre images. That's delirium logic.
And with that idea in your head, the poem's structure suddenly makes a whole different kind of sense. All those sudden jumps in time and space, that chorus of different voices, the collage of images, maybe it isn't just a metaphor for a broken culture. It's a perfect, visceral depiction of a mind in the grip of a fever dream.
Okay, here's the second key term we need. It's innervation. This isn't just about being tired. It's that profound, soul-deep exhaustion that follows a serious illness, a physical, mental, and even moral draining of every last drop of vitality.
Now, let's apply these ideas. Take one of the poem's most famous lines. Traditionally, this is read as a spiritual or philosophical statement, referencing Buddhist teachings about passion and suffering.
But if you read it through this pandemic lens, something much more immediate and physical jumps out. It's the literal sensation of a body on fire with fever.
And for readers in 1922 who had just lived through that pandemic, this feeling would have been painfully, instantly recognizable.
Or what about this image? It's a bizarre, almost grotesque line about a mouthful of decaying teeth that's too dry to even spit. I mean, what on earth could that mean?
Well, it's a direct, powerful image of the extreme dehydration and thirst that Eliot himself wrote about in his letters. Remember, that extreme dryness in his mouth has become a wasteland in his poetry. The personal, physical experience is encoded right there in the poem's imagery.
So when you look at it this way, the whole poem is just dominated by the two primary outcomes of the flu. First, literal death is everywhere. Corpses, rattling bones, drowned bodies. And second, there's that state of innervated living death, where the survivors are just shells, completely drained of vitality, like zombies wandering through a desolate landscape.
So, okay, what's the big takeaway here? Why does reading this 100-year-old poem this way actually matter? Why is finding the ghost of a forgotten pandemic in these famous lines so important?
Here's the truly brilliant part. The poem doesn't just describe the symptoms of the flu. In a way, it performs the cultural amnesia that surrounds it. That constant theme of silence, of people who can't speak or connect, that's not just abstract modernist anxiety, it perfectly captures the reality of a trauma so personal and so isolating that it became unspeakable, and because of that, it was forgotten by history. And this quote really brings it all home. The poem's famous fragmentation isn't just the shrapnel from a war, it's the debris of a viral catastrophe that shattered everything. Bodies, memories, communities, and the very structure of the mind itself. And that leaves us with a pretty haunting final question. The wasteland may be a secret monument to a pandemic that everyone tried to forget. And it makes you wonder, 100 years from today, what stories will be told about our time? What will we remember, and what, like the great influenza, will be quietly erased?